I'm Sarah Bivens.
And I'm Matthew Bivens.
We had a home birth back in 2016.
So we started a podcast about it.
And then grew it into a birth brand to help future and current parents believe in their success with home birth.
This is the place to hear home birth stories, along with helpful resources and tips to feel empowered and supported in your birth journey.
This is Doing It at Home. Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. I'm Sarah. Thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate you being here, hanging out with us, spending some time listening to some empowering birth stories and conversations. Today's episode is entitled, What Counts as a Home Birth? And it's a home birth story with Marissa Miller. So, before we get into that, just want to remind you of a couple of things. First off, if you are not subscribed to the show, please go ahead and do that. And if you feel so inspired to drop a review, we very much appreciate that. I'm going to get back to reviews here in 1 second because I want to read a listener review that popped up recently. We really, really appreciate it. And, you know, it helps out there in the crazy world of algorithms in terms of helping people to find the show, to find the podcast. So if you've gotten anything out of the show and you want to pay it forward, or you want to support in some way and ensure that this show keeps running, this train keeps moving, please, we really appreciate it. Go ahead and do that. And then if you want to get involved further, subscribe, follow us on all the ways, sign up for our newsletter. That's a really great way to get into the community more, learn more about episodes that are dropping each week, things that we're up to, resources that we share, just a really great way to be in communication with one another. We also have our Facebook group. We have our Instagram page. And then if you have gotten anything out of the show, if it has been of value to you, if it has supported you in your journey in some way, and you would like to support the space so that we can continue to do that, we graciously receive any monetary gifts, donations that you would like to extend to us and would like to gift us. We certainly appreciate that. And it goes right back into the space and make sure that we can keep doing what we're doing, and that the show will go on, as they say. So thank you for that. You can find all the links to that in the show notes, as well as in the links from our social media accounts. So all of that is there. Back to reviews for a second. I want to read this most recent one because it's really awesome. Really appreciated it. It is from Yegua Uno. And it says, if there is one word to best describe this podcast, it would be empowering. I know it's not everyone's cup of tea to choose home birth, but for those that do, often find themselves judged, ridiculed, or questioned by people that are simply not informed correctly. This was the first podcast I subscribed to back in 2017 when I found out about podcasts. I had just finished The Business of Being Born, which opened up my mind about birth. I love how raw, real, and relatable Sarah and Matthew are, and I appreciate what they have created. I totally recommend this, especially if you're curious about what home birth can look like through many unique stories that people bring here. Yego Uno, thank you so much. Really appreciate you. That's amazing. And 2017. I'm so honored to be one of the first podcasts that you've learned about back in the day. Yeah, podcasts were still kind of new and people didn't really know what they were, and it was like the wild, wild west of content. And it still kind of is a little bit, people are still learning about podcasts, but we've been here since 2016 and we keep rolling. So here we are. So thank you again. And to get into the episode today, as I mentioned, the title is What Counts as a Home Birth? And that question is one that our guest, Marissa, found herself asking. She said to herself, does that count as a home birth? What I just had there, because she planned for a home birth and shifted to a non-emergent hospital transfer toward the end of her labor. And so I'm sure this is something that comes up for those who are thinking about planning a home birth and wonder about a possible transfer, or those who have gone through that and might also be processing and healing mix of conflicting emotions that might come up around that. And so what ultimately determines how you relate to it, how you label it, what you call it, and how can you feel great about that, and how can you feel empowered by that? Because ultimately, when we talk about this in the episode, yes, we are huge proponents of home birth here. We love home birth. And ultimately, it's about doing it with love, wherever you do it and whomever you do it with. So that's what we really want to hit on here. And we really want to create the space for here for you to get that sense and to feel that affirmation in whatever it is that you're doing and choosing. So some highlights from this episode, we talk about finding a midwifery group with hospital privileges and how that's possible. And if that is something that is important to you, how you can do that. Big emphasis on partner support and how partners can be involved in the birth experience, particularly in the home birth setting. How birth is not dramatic at its core. Birth is not dramatic. It doesn't have to be. The importance of consent-based practice in care providers, hospital policies after giving birth, and that you can do things that are hard and it's okay to question the norm. So those are some of the highlights for you. Again, it's a really great conversation with Marissa Miller. Quick word from our sponsor, and then we will dive right in. Hi, Marissa. Welcome to the show. We're so excited to have you.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
Yes. Thanks for joining us and doing it at home, Marissa.
Yeah, very excited.
So tell us, Marissa, a little bit about you and your family.
Sure. So my name's Marissa. My husband's Steven, and we have a beautiful 1-year-old now named LJ. We live in upstate New York, and yeah, that's about it. We like spending a lot of time outside and hiking, and limited based on weather, but we like doing all the things.
That's great.
Love that.
And so let's talk about home birth, because that's, why we're here, birth, babies, all of that.
Why don't we?
What did home birth come into your awareness, or is it something you kind of knew about before? Did you know it was for you? Did you just kind of see other people? What's that history like for you?
Yeah, it wasn't something that was ever even in my peripheral for years. I actually was it's kind of a weird roundabout way, but I was in a wedding group, like a support Facebook group. It was a more progressive group, and they shared an offshoot for moms, and someone shared a podcast. It's not a podcast anymore, but it was called Birth Queens.
Okay. Yeah.
And it was a midwife and a doula, and I started listening to it. This was before we were even trying to conceive. And the more I listened, the more I was like, this is a very interesting way to do things. And then I started to feel more passionate and bought the Ina May book, watched the documentaries, and really kickstarted the journey that way. So it's interesting when I think about it, because I was looking through some stuff preparing for this interview, and I was like, wow, the serendipity of finding that random Facebook post has changed the trajectory of my entire life.
Wow.
Isn't that fascinating?
That's so cool.
When you do that, when you take that moment to kind of chart things back and just all the little moments. I mean, it really is so beautiful. I mean, all of life, just so beautiful. And if we take that moment kind of like you did and take that stock, just how, we believe there's no accidents, there's no coincidences, and just all the synchronicities and how they all come together. And for us to be talking right now, can be linked to that moment.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
What about with Steven and his ideas on home birth? Like, was that in his awareness?
No, it wasn't. So we both come from medical families, so traditional Western medicine. And he was receptive to it, but understandably apprehensive based on both of our upbringings. It didn't take him long to get him on board, honestly. I think he respected that it's my body and I'm doing the heavy lifting, and B, he trusts me, and I showed him the resources and we watched the things together. And the fun part now, which I was just telling my sister recently, is he is now so passionate about home birth, which is so interesting to see. And he'll come home from work and go off about something, and I'm like, yes. I love seeing that you now not only are supportive of it, but you are an advocate yourself, which is so cool to see.
That is such a fun common side effect, if we'll call it that we see and is a pattern that comes up on the show and all the stories that we've listened to. The partners that, could have been anywhere on the scale from open to more reticent, who then become these champions and, will be kicking it at a barbecue. And the next thing you know, there's a huddle, of men or partners gathered around talking about birthing options. And, they're dropping the language and the jargon, and you're just like, go on. Yes.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, he came around pretty quick, and then it was smooth sailing from there. So that's good.
Okay. So then you were clear about home birth before conceiving. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Cool.
So we had interviewed a couple midwife groups here in New York, and I wanted someone with hospital privileges.
Okay.
So I was still like teetering between, and that'll come into play later in the story. But so that's what's important to me. So we chose a group that was a home birth midwife group that also had privileges at some of the local hospitals in case we did have to transfer. So we had interviewed them and lined them up before we even were pregnant. So then when I did get pregnant, and it was COVID, so everything was different, but I was able to just call and start my visits right away. So that was nice.
That's cool.
You mentioned the background and the medical family, Western medicine. I'm curious because I'm sure there are others who can relate. We certainly can. Did you have to navigate that at all in terms of sharing, or did you share, or were there questions, feedback, comments, likes, dislikes?
Yes, that is a great question. Yes, to all of it. I took an interesting approach, which I don't necessarily recommend. But I set a boundary after I told the first few people, and I decided not to tell other people after that. So I got a lot of pushback, not necessarily overt pushback, but even comments like, wow, you're so brave. I could never do that. Like things like that don't instill confidence in a first-time pregnant person doing something that most people don't do. So I had told my immediate family knew, Stephen's immediate family knew, I told a few close friends. And then other than that, I would either skirt around it or I would just lie if someone asked where we were delivering, because I didn't want to go down that road. And I wasn't always energized enough to defend my choices. I'm sure you have interviewed people before who have had similar sentiments.
Yeah, absolutely.
So and hopefully when we get pregnant again, I definitely will do a different approach because I have a lot more confidence now. But yeah, it was challenging because people had a lot of questions that I didn't necessarily know the answers to about the mechanics of home birth and things that you would never ask someone going to an OB. You just sort of say, oh, that's great. Like, I'm happy for you. And I felt like that was a hard thing to grapple with for myself.
You put that so well.
Yeah.
You know, where you are clear for yourself that you're making a decision and it works and resonates for you and your family. Yet when you share that with other people and they then present their fears and then they hit you back with all these questions, you know, I was in some scenarios like that as well, where people would fire back these questions as if I was a midwife.
Yeah.
Right.
And I was like,
exactly.
Wait a minute. I'm very clear on my decision. I'm at peace. I don't need to know all these things that you're firing at me. And every once in a while, that wasn't necessarily doubt, but that like, you should be more prepared. You should be more knowledgeable. And so the way that you describe your experience, like, I can relate with you on that for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because my mom's a nurse and she's wonderful and she's hugely supportive of me, but she was apprehensive about the home birth, and I finally was able to coordinate for my midwife to just talk directly to my mom on the phone.
Nice.
And that eased a lot of her anxieties because I was like, I can't recite all the studies like you're saying. I'm not a midwife, but my midwife can, and she was happy to do that, which was wonderful. So
that is a theme that we hear on this podcast all the time. As soon as people with their fears and their preconceived notions sit down and have a conversation with a midwife, they leave changed. You know, and they may not necessarily become like the biggest home birth advocate, but they leave informed and having a completely different perspective. And we hear that time and time again. So anybody listening, if you have a person in your family, your partner who is like totally not for home birth, set up a conversation with a midwife if they're open, because it changes a lot of things.
Absolutely.
I love too, and just to add, I want to acknowledge you, Marissa, and I'm really glad you bring it up about when you might be asked questions that you might not necessarily know the answers to, and that's going to continue through becoming a parent, what choices you make around your kids, whether it's school, medical, anything. That stuff comes up, and I can very much relate to that in our own situations that we've gone through from pregnancy to now being parents, and I know others do as well. And I think that hesitation what I would offer to those going through that, because that's so real. Then you feel like you're not as well informed, or you feel like people can just poke holes and everything's going to leak out of this choice that you've made. Yeah. That's going to be when the expectation is to intellectualize everything that we do. And particularly around a thing like birth, which is not an intellectual experience. It's not an intellectual thing. It's a heart-centered thing. It's a spirit-based thing. And so if you're in the realm of intellectual, then sure, that it's going to be picked apart, it's going to be analyzed, all those things. But if you're clear that you're coming from a clear intentioned heart space around your choice, then you're not having the same argument anymore. They're on one level and you can be on another, and you can just go off and do your thing, solidified, confident in what you're choosing, even if you don't know a technical answer that, like you said, they would not be asking if you were going to a hospital. They would not be asking you, well, what happens if this, and this, and what would the procedure be, and blah, 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 blah. Like, no one's asking that. So I just offer that for those that are in that space of, I'm making this choice, but someone's going to ask me the one question that I'm not going to know the answer to, and it's just going to topple the whole thing down. Maybe if your goal is to be intellectual about it too. But if you choose to be in that, heart-centered space, then you don't need to argue with someone about technicalities. So
right. It's such a great point. And I think that's the way I sort of dealt with that, was drawing that boundary, and I just didn't open the conversation up. But I think with more confidence, being able to do what you're describing is something that would be ideal.
I think it's fantastic that you drew a boundary also.
Yeah, heck yeah.
You just sounds like you were clear, like, I'm interested in this, I'm not interested in that. And, so I'm going to do what I need to do to protect the bubble, right? To only have the empowering, encouraging, loving, supportive energy and conversation. So props to you, because that's not easy to do.
No.
So what was the plan or the intention around the birth itself? Who were you having? Who were you intending to be there? Were there some elements or things that you knew you wanted, didn't want? How did that kind of unfold for you all?
Yeah, the only thing that was important to us was that it was just Stephen and I there, and the midwife team. So we didn't want anyone else to be even notified when I went into labor. We just didn't want to deal with the outside noise of having to text updates and things like that. So when I did go into labor, I talked to my mom on the phone, and I didn't tell her I was in labor, which now we laugh about because I had to mute her during a contraction.
Oh, wow.
We told her as soon as he came out. But that was just something that we decided that we didn't want to do, was because our midwife had advised us. She said, sometimes it can take days, and you don't want to be having to text people and say, I'm blankety blank now, this and that. So besides it just being us there, and not having anyone else in that mental or physical space, that was really the only, we had some, we didn't end up using, but we had like incense and some flameless candles, and I had made a playlist. None of that got used. Maybe the playlist, I think he did a little bit. None of that really mattered to me during the birth. We did have, we have a large tub, so we used that during the birth a lot. But yeah, other than that, those were really the only things that were on our list.
Okay.
What was it, going back to your decision to not tell anybody? We've heard stories of people choosing that because birth number one, they informed everyone, and then it was all, craziness and people texting and all the annoyances of that. And so for birth number 2 or 3 or whatever down the line, they chose not to do that. But what was it for you all that got into your mind? Yeah, you know what? Those are going to be distractions and sort of unwanted noise, and I'm going to not even entertain that from the beginning.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because our families are not annoying. If anything, they're very supportive. So I think they would have been texting concerned and wanting updates, but they're not people that, it's not something about our family or friends. It was more just, I think we wanted it to be an intimate experience with Stephen and I personally feel anxious when I'm not responding to text messages just in my day-to-day life. I didn't want to have any of that, whether it was like subconscious or not, anxiety of like, oh, well, so-and-so hasn't been updated. So we just set a hard line and said, we're not going to text anybody unless we need help, or unless the baby comes out. And that's what we did.
Gotcha.
It sounds like you all had an idea or a vision for the type of birth that you wanted, or at least the type of birth experience. Is that accurate? Because just from what you're sharing, like the two of you knew you wanted it to be more intimate, and you did all this preparation before even becoming pregnant. So can you talk a little bit about the conversations that you and Stephen had that were around getting clear on your intention or clear on your birth vision?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we definitely, it was something we wanted it to be the two of us, and I wanted him to be very involved, as is a common theme with home births, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But it wasn't, so we did a birth class with a midwife, not with our midwife, but with a different one. And she actually, I interviewed her to become a doula. And when I told her who my midwife was, she's like, I can't take your money in good faith. Like, your midwife is so good, you're covered. You don't need a doula on top of it.
Wow.
Amazing.
But we did take a birth class with her. So, and a big tenet of her class, it ended up being one-on-one remote, of course, just because of the times, but which was great for us. But a big tenet was partner support. And that was the first time that I really had heard about that. And she talked about some of the things she said. If Marissa's licking her lips, grab her chapstick. If she looks hot, get her a towel. If she looks thirsty, hand her water. Don't ask her what she wants to drink. You know her, you're her husband.
Yeah.
You know, things like that. Don't make her go from her primal headspace to her analytical headspace. And I just thought that was such, and I tell everybody that who gives birth, whether it's in a hospital or wherever it is, that was such a hugely influential thing. And it played out during labor. I remember, I'm sure multiple times, but one time I remember I was in the tub and I wanted to get out, and someone asked me, I think one of the assistants, which bed do you want to get into? Which is a very simple question. And I could not answer it. I was like, I don't know. And Stephen immediately was like, this bed, we're going into this room. This is where we're going to do it. And I remember just being so happy and calmed that he did that. It seems silly, like if you haven't been in that, to realize how like insurmountable a simple decision can be when you're in labor. But that partner support, and obviously like the counter pressure and the counting or the breathing and things like that. But also just holding space for what I needed and being the person that was able to make sure that people weren't bringing negativity into that space during pregnancy, during labor, postpartum, being that gatekeeper. I love my husband, and he was an amazing birth partner, and I could not have done it without him. And I think that's such a huge missed opportunity, I would say, in the general culture in this country, in America, because people, it's just sort of like, oh, I don't want to see what's going on down there. Like, wake me up when it's over. Or the dad's in the waiting room, or like on the TV shows. I hope that's not how it plays out in real life. But
Yeah.
I think that's, I hate that, because I think that people, whether it's a husband or a mom or a sister or same-sex partner, whoever it is, I think that person should be almost as involved as the birthing mother. Yeah. So that was something that was important for us.
So cool. Great job, Stephen. Also, that's
for real. All this
showing up powerfully. Love it.
You're crushing it, Marissa. I'm following you with everything you're saying. So just keep going. So as we got closer to birthing time, what was going on? How were you feeling? And then how did you kind of know things were starting?
Mm-hmm. So my pregnancy was pretty straightforward. We didn't really have any complications. I was able to stay active and all that. So I kind of knew that, and I was a first-time mom, I knew that I would probably go past my due date. So our midwife had explained that and sort of the statistics around that. And I had no expectation of having, we didn't know the sex, but now I'll say him because it's a boy. I had no expectation of having him before the due date. So on 2 days after our due date, or no, 3 days after, I don't even remember, I was working from home and I started to have some cramping, and I called my husband who was at work, and very calm, because it's not dramatic. That's the other thing that I tell people. It's never like, at least from what I've heard and what I've seen and what I've experienced, it's not like this hugely dramatic shift where immediately you have to drop everything. So I continued working. I told him, he was doing a half day. I said, bring your stuff because you're not going to be going back for a week or two. Or he was home for longer than that, but he worked his day. I worked my day. We ate dinner. I was having contractions about every 15 minutes for the first part of the day. And probably around dinner time, we contacted our midwife, and she said, the most important thing is that you rest, that you eat, that you hydrate. And we had already come up with a plan for if I was going to have to labor through the night, I was going to do Benadryl and red wine. That's what I did. And surprisingly, I felt well rested, even though I only slept every 6 minutes. I was getting up for contractions, but I felt okay. And around like 4 a.m., I passed my mucus plug, and the contractions were getting to the point where I was having to be on all fours and really like intentionally breathe through them. And we reached out to the midwife around probably 6:30 a.m., just updated her, and she, asked a few questions, gave us some feedback, told me to continue doing what I was doing, rest, don't, bounce on a ball, don't go for walks, don't try to speed things up, which I had no interest in doing. Also of note, it had snowed 2 feet that night, so I wasn't going to go outside.
Oh, wow.
But that was actually a funny part of our story too. So we moved into this house right when I got pregnant, and the previous owners left their snowblower, and this was the first storm. And poor Steven, went out when I was laboring to get the driveway cleared. We have a very steep, long driveway. And the snowblower broke, so then he had to shovel it, which honestly, none of that really mattered. Like it sounds like funny or stressful, but it was just kind of like, all right, this is what it is. He's hugely capable. He was handling it. And our midwife had around 11. She said, we have a midwife office north of us and south of us, and we're kind of 30 minutes between. And she said, are you okay if I come to your house and work? Because I think if I go to the other office, I'll get stuck because the snow was so bad. I said, sure, that's fine. Steven's outside trying to clear the driveway. So he got that done, half the driveway done. And she came probably around 11, and I was still feeling okay. The contractions were definitely painful, probably about 5 minutes apart at that point. And it was just her there. She was doing some other work. And then she watched me go through a contraction at one point, and I looked like I was going through a contraction. And she said, would you be okay if I check you? And that's another thing that is so interesting, and now I think great about midwifery care is consent-based practice. Because I was so confused and it was the whole time, pregnancy, birth, postpartum. I've never been in a situation that I can think of where a doctor or anyone said, like, can I do this? Are you okay if I do this? What do you think about me doing this? And that was the whole model of care. And I said yes for that. And I didn't want to know any numbers about dilation. That was the first time I'd ever been checked by her. And now I know I was about 6 centimeters then when she checked me. I didn't find that out until after he was born. But so then trying to think, the snowplow came and like piled more snow on the bottom of the driveway. So at some point, Steven went back out to deal with that so the assistants could come. When the midwife came, this is just more funny things about the snow. She couldn't get into our neighborhood because they hadn't plowed yet. So we had to like reroute her. We got it all figured out, but it's just funny looking back at the photos now. But I was just doing my thing, laboring. I did some on the toilet. I sat and labored there, did some on the side, and did some on the bed. And finally, Steven came back in, and that was what I really was craving, was him. That's what I was asking for. It was like, where's Steven? I don't care about the driveway anymore. I just want him to be close to me. That was very comforting. So then some other people came, other midwives. There were 3 people total, 2 midwives and 1 assistant, and Steven and then I. And at one point, I think we're now at like 3 p.m., it was pretty painful. And the midwife asked if I wanted to get in the tub, and I said no. but she was like, I'm just going to fill it just in case. Like, she's done this before. And as soon as it was full, I was like, okay, I'll get in it.
Nice.
And it like, it changed my life getting in it. It was like immediately the pain was gone, not forever, but for long enough time. I was like, wow, that is incredible. At least for me, the hot water was just like an amazing thing. So if anyone is doing a home birth, even if you don't have a tub or you don't want to rent the tub, I'm sure you have a shower. If not a shower, access to like hot water and washcloths. That was something that was really helpful for me.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, for your midwife to use that experience and kind of intuitive sense, like just have it. And if you don't want it, great. But if you want it in the moment you want it, you can have access to it. So I think that's great.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. That was something that was really beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
So around probably 5, I was in the birthing tub, which was just our tub. And she said, most of your cervix is gone, but your bag of waters is like blocking the head, from what I could understand. She said, we can keep on keeping on. I can break your water, again, with the consent-based care. And she's like, it's totally up to you. Like, there's nothing bad's going to happen if we don't do anything. It's not like you're in distress or the baby's in distress. So she sort of left the room. Stephen and I chatted, and we had really wanted no intervention. So we talked for a couple of minutes, but I was like, at that point, I was like, I don't think her breaking my water is something that's like a high value for me. So we did it. That was something that, and I was in the tub, so it was anticlimactic. It didn't hurt or anything like that. And then I kept laboring in there, eventually switched into one of the bedrooms, and she, my midwife, asked me if I was feeling certain sensations, which now I'm realizing were like sensations to push. And looking back, of course, hindsight's 2020. I don't think I was feeling those sensations. So I think, and I said that I was, and I think I was just tired, and I'm a first-time birth person and maybe a little bit inexperienced. So I was pushing, I think, I know I was pushing for longer than I would have wanted to. So I think that's what made it a little bit challenging. And we did a lot of different things, all fours on the side. We did the birth stool. They tied a sheet, like a knot in a sheet, and I held that while I was pushing, moving all around. And it was challenging. It was definitely more challenging than I expected it to be. And even with all the support and with, the breathing techniques. And at one point I asked my midwife if I could take Tylenol, and the way she responded made me realize like it wasn't going to do anything. It's just like, she was like, sure, if you want to.
Go for it. Oh, wow.
Because I was just grasping for something, to give me some relief. So eventually, which again, hindsight, looking back now, as I was sort of compiling my thoughts for this interview, I think what was happening at this point was I was in transition, and I would hit a wall, and I was like, I can't do this. I can't get this baby out. I need to go to the hospital. I need a vacuum. I need them to physically pull this baby out of me. And I'd said that for a little while. At this point, I'd been pushing for like 2.5 hours. Mm-hmm. And the midwives went out in the hallway, talked to Stephen, came back in, talked to me. They're like, again, it's totally up to you. You've mentioned going to the hospital a couple times. Is that something that you want to consider? And left the room. Stephen and I talked about it, and we decided to do that. So then we started this journey. It wasn't emergent, so it wasn't like we were rushing or anything. But at this point, I was really not able to I can't remember it that well. It was like splotchy. And now it's been a year, so I think that is part of it too. But I remember vividly the midwife assistant, who was wonderful, putting my sweatpants on because it was cold, putting I think I put boots on. I must have put something on because there was snow on the ground. And the car that we had chosen as our just in case car that had the car seat was blocked in with snow. So then we had to quickly I say we, I wasn't involved.
Right.
Stephen had to
collectively
move the cars.
Someone. Yeah.
Yes. So it was the midwife, me, and Stephen was driving the car, and that was our plan. We had gone through, in case this happens, this is what we're going to do. This is where we're going to go. And the midwife was in the back with me. I was kneeling. And at that point, I was pushing without even thinking about it. It just, I couldn't not push. So again, hindsight, I'm like, I wonder if that was like the fetal ejection reflex. So that was definitely happening. It was about a 15-minute drive from our house to the hospital where we went. And that was sort of going on the whole time. It was just probably every minute, maybe even less. It was just pushing without even thinking about it and without a choice by me. And the midwife had the Doppler and she was doing everything. And nothing was, again, like nothing was emergent. So she wasn't like concerned. It was just me feeling like I wanted to go there. And so we got there. Stephen dropped us off. I remember, it's funny the details you remember, but I remember them trying to temp me because it was COVID times and you had to like have a certain temp, which seems crazy now that I think about it, that they were trying to temp me. I was like swaying and I couldn't get my head lined up in like the face shot thing that would take your temp. Somehow we like were able to overstep that, and the midwife got me. She had called ahead, so we walked up to the delivery room. And immediately, as soon as I got in, I walked right into the bathroom in the room, and I was like, I gotta go to the bathroom. Went right in there. Stephen parked the car, came upstairs. He came in the bathroom, and at that point, they were trying to like put the gown and all that jazz on me, and I wasn't really paying attention to any of that. And I immediately was like feeling like a baby was coming out. And I said to my midwife, I was like, something's happening. She came in and she's like, you're crowning. This baby's coming right now.
Wow.
Again, not like, it wasn't even scary at this point. It sounds like it was. It was like, oh, we were in the car and then we did this. But it was just like, all right, the baby's coming. And I was just so like elated that I could see the light at the end of the tunnel. I didn't even care where I was or what I was wearing or, any of that. So I walked over to the bed. And within a couple minutes, he came out. So I think from door to door, it was about 14 or 15 minutes we were in the hospital.
Oh my goodness.
Obviously not long enough for any type of paperwork. The nurses didn't know my name. Stephen said when I was pushing, they were yelling like, go mom, or go mother or something. But it was, our midwife was able to deliver him. I didn't have any tearing. Minimal bleeding. He got right on my chest. So we still got to do a lot of the things that were really important to me. And as soon as he came out, which is also like an amazing thing in my mind, I felt great, obviously, because I had my son, but also I think the adrenaline and like the endorphins, I just felt amazing. Like my body, I was like, I want to do it again. I kept saying that to Stephen, like the whole next few weeks. I was like, I want to do it again. The next day, I want to do it again. And that's where the experience got like a little bit interesting, because as soon as he came out, and again, like I felt fine, I looked at Stephen and I was like, can we leave? Can we go home? Like this is within probably his first hour of life. And that's what I wanted. I was like, all right, well, we did what we did, but they said if we left, it would be AMA, against medical advice. So then our insurance wouldn't have covered it. That's what I was told. I don't know if that's accurate or not. But so we ended up staying. And it was nice in the respect that we got food and the staff there was great. But it wasn't what I wanted. I wanted to be home. And I didn't want people to be coming in and checking. And we were both healthy. So again, I know everyone's doing their jobs and things like that, but we ended up having to stay for 2 nights because of the timing. We had him at late at night, almost into the next day. So in order for whatever their rules were, we had to end up staying. So that part I didn't love. And then it was very challenging, and it still is for me to grapple with, did we have a home birth? Did we have a hospital birth? Because people ask, people that know me, or they would say, you know, oh, so you did do a home birth, because I'll talk about my birth and I'll talk about the tub. And I'm like, I don't want to launch into like a 40-minute story. So sometimes I just say yes. Sometimes I say no. So that part has been hard for me to grapple with even now, because it's something that I don't know. I mean, technically we didn't, but like 98% of it was at home, and, you know, we got to the hospital, but I didn't actually do any of the interventions or epidurals or anything like that. So that part, I think, is like where I am confused still, and going into, if we're able to get pregnant again, I think that will be challenging, because people will say, well, why would you do that again if you had to go to the hospital for your first birth? But my husband and I both feel, if anything, that just cemented what we want to do and what was important to us. And so I would say that's a confusing part. But other than that, it was a wonderful experience. I was so happy to have the midwife that we had, and the experience that we had. I think it was just so empowering and enjoyable. I know that sounds interesting, but it was just like a really, really incredible experience from start to finish, from like prenatal care all the way through postnatally.
Wow. I get that energy from you. Just that it was enjoyable, you know, and incredible. That's the way that I experienced you tell the story, again, from prenatal care all the way through the end. So I think that's wonderful.
Mm-hmm. And I feel you deeply, Marissa, on just the processing of things. I know someone else is listening right now and is in a very similar situation, and just to feel understood and feel heard, and like you're not alone in that, which you certainly are not. And that it's a mix. It's such an interesting mixed bag. Any birth, anywhere, any way it goes, can have a bunch of stuff that comes up with it. And so to just honor that, and I see you, I feel you, I hear you, and it's ultimately, I believe, a really beautiful thing and a really great opportunity for your healing, and to share the story like you are now too, like sharing it, unpacking it, and allowing others to learn from it as well, and to just give ourselves grace and space around, you know, whatever feelings that we're having, whether they be confusing, conflicting, and everything. So I just wanted to take that moment to acknowledge you and really appreciate you sharing so vulnerably and openly about that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think when we were setting up for this podcast, I was even like, I don't know if I qualify, because I didn't technically. So it is, I appreciate you saying that. I think there's a gray space, and I think it doesn't have to be so dichotomous. I think we can work together, you know, Eastern and Western medicine and all those things. So, but it's challenging at times.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, maybe to carve out your own label of it, or your own way you relate and identify with it. You know, when someone says like, oh, what kind of birth did you have? Or where did you give birth? Like, well, cool thing about me is, you know, and then whatever you want to say, you know, whatever it is, or, you know, the really cool thing about LJ is, you know, because it's all a part of the story, and, you know, you can kind of create your own lane of what kind of birth you're creating and having. And we've talked about this as well too with, yes, we talk about home birth a ton on this show. Yes, home birth is what we had, and, you know, it just opened up this whole world for us, but it's really about the intention of the space and the love around the space, regardless of who you do it with and where you do it. You know, do it with love, as we as we say. So just do it with love. And that sounds like there was a lot of love around you and Stephen and LJ, and continues to be. So I think that's really awesome.
Yeah, and I think I'm such an advocate for the whole experience, not just the actual birth, but the whole having hour-long visits and being able to have in-home postnatal visits. I just can't speak enough about the benefits of all of the whole model. It's just so superior in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, we definitely agree.
What would you say, as we kind of wrap up here, is a big takeaway that you would share, or just something that you would offer that you really learned and that someone else can get something from?
Mm-hmm. I think I've said this to a lot of people who I know who have been pregnant. It's not to say that you will be fine because it's not hard. I think it's more important to reframe it to you can do things that are hard, and birth is something that's very challenging. But I think the fact that we go through this experience of birth and it's challenging each person in their own way, physically, mentally, emotionally, it has prepared me so much for being a mother and having confidence in myself and trusting myself and trusting my body and knowing that I'm the best mother for my son. And it's like an interesting thing because I don't think I would have had as much confidence as I do if I hadn't gone this route. And I am so grateful for that, because I've noticed times, not to say that I don't get anxious with him, of course, and overthink things, but I always am able to center myself back and say, and that's what I learned during my whole pregnancy is you are the best person to care for him, and your body knows what to do in terms of breastfeeding and this and that, and you know how to comfort him. So getting that confidence and that trust in myself through the whole birth experience is something that I will take with me forever. And another part is being able to question the quote unquote social norms. I've noticed that start to pan out as he's getting older and we're faced with more decisions, and I'm more confident and better equipped to be able to say, well, I know this is what has always been done, but this isn't what works best for our family. And so both those things, I think, are things that were great takeaways from me.
That's awesome.
Oh,
I love those takeaways.
Oh, yeah.
Writing those down.
Yeah, we're taking notes over here.
Oh, amazing. Marissa, thank you so much again. We really appreciate you. It's been such a blessing having you in the space and to have you on the show and share your story. You're amazing.
Yeah, thank you, Marissa.
Thank you both so much for allowing a space to share it.
Quick note about the Doing It at Home podcast. Matthew and I are not doctors or medical professionals, and nothing we say should be taken as medical advice or opinion. If you have medical or health-related questions, please take them to a trained professional. We're here simply to entertain you with stories and conversations about pregnancy, birth, and parenthood.